Saturday evening dragged on in a smooth, predictable streak. The bathroom was still steaming, a pale, whitish haze was spreading on the mirror, with thin drops trickling down it, like lazy snails leaving a wet trail behind them. The fan hummed softly, shuddering occasionally, and all this familiar household noise merged with the distant, almost weightless sway of Caroline's voice. A lullaby was drifting from the nursery, the pages of a book rustling between the notes, which she was probably turning almost by touch. Somewhere in the hallway, a board was creaking, the same one, the third from the left, which they had all been meaning to fix, but had never gotten around to. The house was breathing, settling for the evening, like a warm blanket on shoulders. Tom stepped out of the shower, shook the water out of his hair, the drops tickled his neck, slid down his collarbone, and closed his eyes for a moment. A pleasant tiredness after the hot stream spread over his shoulders, back, feet. It smelled of mint shower gel, fresh cotton fabric, and ceramics heated by steam. He reached for a towel, fluffy, heavy, with a slightly frayed edge, and with a familiar movement patted his face, temples, ears. The quiet sh of water in the pipes seemed to still sound in his head. And then his gaze caught on the edge of the sink. A small plastic circle, pale pink, muted, like a child's t-shirt faded in the wash. Tom didn't immediately realize what he was looking at. His fingers reached out on their own, picked it up, turned it over in his palm. The plastic gave way slightly, creaked not sharply, but thinly, barely audibly, as if someone were breaking a dry blade of grass. Inside, in the pink circle, in the metallic gleam of tiny strokes, barely noticeable numbers appeared. Days of the week: Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. They were arranged in a circle, like marks on a clock face, only instead of hands, the familiar course of someone else's routine. A cap, from a round container. Birth control pills. Tom recognized them, not instantly, but the recognition fell into his palm, as if the thing had named itself. His memory responded briefly, the time when he and Caroline had just moved in together, when there were always two pairs of sneakers in the hallway and one pair with heels left behind while running, when the alarm on her phone rang in the evening at 9 o'clock, and she, laughing, pulled a small pearl of a pill from the round blister. The click of the cap. "Remind me in an hour," she said, "just in case." All this was long ago, as if under glass clear and inaccessible. The pink circle in his hand was both foreign and all too familiar. He ran his thumb over the ribbed edge again, clean, smooth, as if it had just come out of a new package. Not a speck of dust, not a sticky streak of soap, not a trace of makeup. Tom, frowning slightly, turned his head toward the trash can. Inside was a gray bag with a thin plastic fringe around the edge. At the very top, a flattened cotton pad with a pale trace of foundation, a squeezed-out, almost knotted tube of toothpaste, an empty bottle of baby shampoo with air bubbles in the plastic, a small cardboard label from a new toothbrush. But nothing round, nothing pink, nothing that promised an answer. He lifted the cap closer to the light. The lamp in the bathroom was not very bright, yellow, and in this yellowness, the plastic seemed warm, like a dessert peach. The edges were not chipped. The inscriptions were clear. Damn. He exhaled almost silently and immediately tried to hold back the rapid, like a fall, leap of thought inside. Accident. Nonsense. The children could have brought it, found it somewhere in an old cosmetic bag. Are there not all sorts of caps in the house, round, similar? But the word similar shrank like a wrong note and did not want to straighten out. A year ago, exactly a year, maybe a little over a year at most, Tom had a vasectomy. It was a decision they had been working towards, not so much for a long time as for a thorough one, counting the months, discussing finances, fatigue, dreams, an apartment where every wall knew how a baby cried at night, and how adults laughed ironically when they could no longer help laughing. "Two is enough, right?" she had asked then. "Enough," he had said, feeling a strange relief with a hint of responsibility. They were sitting in the kitchen, on the edge of morning. The coffee was getting cold on the table, the rain was pounding outside. Then there was the sterile room, the cold sheet, the light in his eyes. The doctor spoke calmly, almost casually. And then months of tests, conversations about probabilities. all of this clear, firm steps. And as soon as enough became a common word, Caroline really did turn off the alarm, removing it from both her and his lives. Freedom, she smiled, hiding the last blister in a box that she seemed to have hidden forever. And now, the cap. Exactly the same. Here, on the sink, where his razor usually lay, his soap stand, and Caroline's hair tie that had lost its elasticity. Tom felt his heart resound in his chest in two beats. Without looking at anyone, without addressing anyone, as if he were afraid to disturb the walls, he placed the cap on the edge of the sink, very carefully, almost respectfully. These simple, direct questions, to which there were no simple, direct answers, began to run through his head. Why? Why now? Whose? And also, that very thought, unformed, and therefore especially unpleasant, like a sound that is about to cut through the silence, but for now only pulls at the air. He turned his gaze to the door. A song was coming from the hallway, her voice, light when she inhaled, slightly rough from the whole day when she exhaled, her measured tenderness set to a melody. Caroline, he called quietly, and he was even surprised by his own voice. It was normal, not alien, quiet. What, dear? She said. There was that familiar, gentle weariness in her voice, delicious as warm milk, like the thin blanket she pulled out in the evenings. Tom felt something swaying in him. A few minutes ago, that voice had meant peace, but now it sounded different not because he had become different, but because the world around him had shifted slightly. No thunder, no catastrophes, just a slight turn of the axis, and the shadows lay differently. You don't know what this is? He asked, trying to keep his voice even. He turned, and there she was, standing in the doorway, her hair in a messy bun, a few strands escaping and framing her face softly. The mess suited her. She was wearing a sweater, thin and pilling on the sleeves, and light wool socks in different shades of gray. One pair always seemed to get lost. For a second, Tom caught the familiar, simple joy of this simple beauty. Their home, their people, their imperfections like markers on a map. What? Show me, she said, coming closer. Tom held out his hand without making a show of it. A shadow of recognition flashed in her eyes. He saw her eyelashes flutter slightly, the corner of her lips move before they returned to their place. Oh, where did we get this? She said. It looks like a lid from. She hesitated, but for a second, just a second, there was an excess of familiarity in that hesitation. That's odd. Maybe I've got one lying around somewhere. Her voice was light, almost carefree. There was no obvious alarm in it. And in her eyes, there was a brief glint, a flicker that immediately went out, as if she had covered the lamp with her hand. She turned to the shelf, to the cupboards. Her movements became a little more energetic than the occasion required. A small door magnet slammed, a towel rustled, a glass jar of cotton swabs barely audibly bumped into the wall. Probably from an old package, she threw over her shoulder. Remember, I used to use these. Maybe the kids found them and played with them. The word kids sounded like a life preserver thrown into the water. Tom nodded silently, a gesture for the very surface, but inside this word did not catch on anything. Their 7-year-old Sam and 4-year-old Lily, they really do find the impossible in the most unusual places. But Sam, engrossed in his construction set, rarely looks into his mother's cupboards, and Lily, willingly putting treasures in her boxes, would certainly take away the bright, round, shiny thing and not put it strictly on the edge of the sink, exactly like an object that they want to notice. I'll have to throw it away, Caroline said more firmly, almost immediately reaching for his hand. The movement was too quick, like a careful attempt to take the words back. Tom held the lid with his fingers for a split second, not out of stubbornness, but out of a strange feeling that when he let go, he wasn't letting go of plastic. Then he released it. The lid fell softly, almost silently, into a bag in the bin and disappeared from sight. Some kind of garbage, she said, and then, as if following a pre-planned plan, changed the subject. Are you out yet? I was just about to make us some tea. Which one would you like, mint or chamomile? Peppermint, Tom said. He found himself looking at her face a little harder than usual, trying to discern what. Some sign, a trace, a pulse, a mystery. But the face was familiar. The soft smile, the faint blue under the eyes from the long day, the small mole by the right ear that he loved. Only in the depths of her gaze seemed to slip a thin shadow, either from the lamp or from his own guess. Excellent, she nodded and went out, almost hurriedly, leaving behind a light scent of cream with a hint of lavender and something sweet like honey. The door did not close, it just returned to its previous position, and he was left alone in the warm gloom of the bathroom, with drops on the mirror and an airy, weightless feeling, as if the air had become thicker. Tom exhaled noisily, the inhalation ragged, like that of a man who has kept his head underwater for too long. He laid his palm on the cool porcelain of the sink, feeling the smooth, perfectly polished curve under his fingers. Accident, he told himself. Nonsense. The words were correct, supportive, like the steps of a ladder. But walking up this ladder was harder than he had expected. The board seemed to spring under his feet. He looked at his reflection. A man with wet, tousled hair, a towel in the shadow of his neck, his eyes reflecting the yellow lamp, looked back at him. He tried to smile, but it came out crooked, like a boy caught in thought. Nonsense, he repeated with his lips, and turned out the light. The corridor greeted him with a twilight warmth. The carpet, narrow, with a worn pattern, sprang under his feet. A child's dinosaur pajamas hung on one of the hooks. A sleepy snore slipped out of the half-open door of the nursery. Tom slowed his pace, peered into the dark rectangle. Two small mounds under the blankets, a star-shaped nightlight drawing dim spots of light on the wall. As always at such moments, a feeling entered his head quietly and firmly, calm, dense like bread. Their children, their fatigue, their happiness strewn on the floor in the form of blocks, cars, tiny socks that disappear as if they had their own secret paths. A switch clicked in the kitchen. The overhead light flickered, uncertainly, like an eye waking up. The tiles on the countertop gleamed coolly. Caroline had already turned the tap on to fill the kettle, and the stream of water sounded energetic every day, the kind of sound that could make you think about anything. She set the kettle on its stand, pressed the button, and it responded with a soft click, then began to hum quietly as it gained temperature. She set two mugs on the table, his blue, with a chipped piece of enamel on the handle, hers white, with a crack that didn't spread because she poured carefully. She took the tea out of the box mint. Chamomile and two long thread tags lay on the table. Her movements were economical, calm. She did everything without fuss, but in this without fuss, she now wanted to catch the rhythm. Had it not become a little faster? Tom sat down in his chair. The wood sighed dully. He placed his palms on the tabletop, feeling the smoothness of the varnish, a couple of barely noticeable scratches left by a plate at some breakfast. The cold from the surface was slowly absorbed through the skin. On the refrigerator, under a magnet, hung a child's picture in felt-tip pens, a house with smoke coming out of the chimney, two sticks of people, a big round red dog. Something clinked in the dish drainer, a thin saucer sound. The kettle hissed a little louder. Its even noise was unexpectedly soothing, like the white noise sometimes used to lull babies to sleep. Tom watched as the water gathered around the spout of the kettle. A thin stream of steam rises and dissolves near the lamp. Caroline turned, met his gaze, and smiled, the little smile he had. "Is it a nice day?" she asked. It was their language for, "Are you alive? Are you with me? Are we still on the same side?" "Fine," he said. The words lined up like matches in a box, all in place, all whole, all the same. The lid, a pink circle, came back to him as clearly as if it had been lying on the table in front of him. He heard the crunch of plastic between his fingers in his head. He imagined it falling into the bag and disappearing. The word children tried to catch on once more. What if Sam had found it on the street? At school, they hadn't been out today. What if Lily had pulled it out of an old drawer? But Tom remembered the drawer. A couple of months ago, when they were cleaning out, Caroline had thrown out all the old bottles, jars, and lids with confidence. Without hesitation, she had done it decisively, but with a smile. "Say goodbye to junk," she had said then, and he had said it. Something didn't add up. The kettle clicked. The water had finished its journey to boiling and was ready. Caroline lifted the lid with a familiar motion, dropped the tea bags in, poured in the boiling water. The scent of mint swung open quickly, like a window in a draft. It came out to meet her, fresh, clean, and seemed to clear the air of unspoken words for a second. Steam trickled down the rim of the mug, casting soft shadows on the table. She set his mug in front of him, her palm briefly touching the table where his hand would be. "Thank you," he said, and there was an almost normal warmth in his voice. Almost. Tom cupped the mug with both palms, feeling the warmth living in the ceramic and flowing into his fingers. He waited until the tea was ready for the first sip, watching the light mist slowly swirl across the surface. And he thought, carefully, neatly, cautiously, like a man who lays out the pieces of a construction set, not knowing what picture he should get. The lid, their agreements, memory, her look, her quick movement, his question, her answer. Too many maybes, too few definitely. But he did not go further toward conclusions. Not today, not at this moment. It was as if he had drawn an invisible line that no one crossed in the kitchen, where it smells of mint, where children sleep behind the wall, where the lamp shines yellowish and too honestly. Caroline sat down opposite him, pulled her leg under her, warmed her fingers on her mug. She looked out the window. Their kitchen was reflected there, their lamp, himself doubled in the glass. "You haven't caught a cold?" she asked, noticing how he mechanically rubbed his neck. "No," said Tom, and took his first small sip. The mint tickled his tongue slightly, the heat slid down. He concentrated on this sensation, simple, clear, about which one could say something definite, and it calmed him a little. And yet, the thought he had so carefully avoided formulating continued to smolder somewhere on the edge. Not a flame, but a spark that did not require air to keep from going out. He knew it, this spark. It could burn out on its own if you did not add dry branches, or it could flare up if you looked at it for too long. Today, he would not add dry branches. He would drink his tea, listen to the kettle groan as it cooled, to the house settling in silence, to the child turning over in his sleep and sending a funny sigh into the darkness. He looked up again and met her eyes. There was weariness in them, warm, homely, and perhaps, just perhaps, and he almost stubbornly put this perhaps aside, a quick shadow that runs and disappears, leaving no trace. Tom nodded to her, their usual nod. "We are here." And in this, "we are here," everything was contained now. The mint, and the light, and the bottle cap thrown into the trash, and the questions that were still lining up and patiently awaiting their turn. The kitchen breathed quietly, the tea grew cold, the house fell silent. Caroline was telling something about a children's book that Lily now only wants to listen to, that one with the mouse, and how Sam proudly showed off his new craft today, a boat that for some reason stubbornly sits on the bottom of the basin, but he promised to fix it. Tom listened, nodded, smiled where necessary, and somewhere deep down, behind all the words and warmth, there remained a small, transparent anxiety, not sharp, not screaming, but quiet, like a weak light under the door. It did not interfere with talking and breathing, did not interfere with holding a mug with both palms. It was simply there. He noticed it, and did not give it a name. When Caroline smiled and reached out to smooth his tousled hair, Tom bowed his head, letting his fingers slide through his hair. Everything was as usual: simplicity, warmth, habit, evening. And only in the shadows of his thoughts, lurking, was a suspicion already flickering, timid, formless, like a reflection somewhere in the depths of a glass. He did not drive it away, did not call it. He simply saw that it was there, and also that for now it did not decide anything. It only breathed nearby, quieter than the steam above the mug. The next morning Tom woke up earlier than usual. The night had broken up into short, ragged segments. When he closed his eyes, the pale pink circle on the porcelain rose up before his mind's eye again, and his heart gave an extra beat. In the dim bedroom, the gray pradon spread across the curtains in a viscous strip. Caroline was asleep, her cheek turned to him on her hand, her fair hair fanned out on the pillow. There was nothing alien in this calm, and yet Tom caught a barely perceptible wrong, as if in a perfectly familiar melody one note was half a tone higher. He lingered his gaze on her face, familiar, dear. He remembered how in recent weeks she had been thoughtful, withdrawn, lingering in the hallway with her phone, sitting longer than usual at her laptop, squinting. At the time, he had attributed it to her job. A lawyer's assistant gets all the thankless work, deadlines, paperwork, pressing clients. He supported her as much as he could. He took on the evening fairy tales, trips to clubs, stupid collections of applications for Sam's school. And still the pink cap flickered in her head, like a light on the dashboard that does not go out, although the car seems to be driving normally. Tom carefully got out of bed, trying not to make the mattress creak. He threw on a t-shirt and walked barefoot into the kitchen, where a cool breeze blew in from the window. The metal sink was cold to the touch as he filled the kettle with water. Rituals brought back normality, he believed in that. He decided to make his own breakfast, down to the last detail. Oatmeal with milk, fried bacon for Sam, toast, Caroline's coffee, just the right strength for her. A task that had a sequence saved him from thoughts that had no sequence. While the kettle was boiling, he put the strawberries on plates. The berries glistened like lacquered buttons. He inhaled the familiar, soothing aroma of ground coffee and, as the water passed through the thick brown funnel, forced himself to think with his head, not his heart. If Caroline had resumed taking the pills, the reason might not only be contraception. The doctor could have prescribed hormones, regulated the cycle, eliminated the pain. Quite reasonable. But why didn't she say anything? Was it because she didn't want to worry? Or didn't want to explain? Stop, he interrupted. You can't make up someone else's mind. A simple rule always worked in their family. Speak before you make assumptions. There was a patter of little heels, light and confused. Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway, disheveled, in unicorn pajamas, her cheek damp from sleep. She rubbed her eyes with her fist and peered at the table. Dad, what are you doing? Is the princess up yet? Tom smiled, warm, as if someone had moved a heater closer to him. Making breakfast. Will you help? Lily nodded, sat down on a high stool, tucked her legs under her, and took hold of a bowl of strawberries with an air of importance. Will you wash the berries for the oatmeal? Tom suggested. I'll be careful. She held out her hands, and the bright water splashed on the berries, carrying away the stuck seeds. A couple of minutes later, Sam appeared in the doorway, his hair bristling like a little lion. He sniffed the air. Dad, is this bacon? Yep, the champion. Tom winked. A surprise for Mom. A surprise for Mom sounded unexpectedly sincere. He really wanted to put everything back in its place with simplicity, care, the usual joy of the morning table. Maybe yesterday he was being dramatic, putting the found bottle cap on too big a scale. They have love, 2 children, a common home, 1,000 habits. Everything else is fixable. Caroline's eyes were still glazed with sleep when she came out. Tom sat her down, kissed her on the cheek, and pushed the mug towards her. Wow, chef, she raised her eyebrows. What a pleasant surprise. I decided to spoil my own. He tried to make his voice sound light. For you the usual, without sugar, but with milk. She nodded and smiled, broadly, but as if with effort. There were thin shadows under her eyes. Tom thought, looks like she didn't sleep well either. The children began chattering like sparrows. Sam was talking about the upcoming school party, debating with himself whether to be an astronaut or an inventor in the costume contest. Lily was pushing the bowl towards herself and demanding more honey so that the porridge will be shiny. Caroline nodded, but her gaze lingered on Tom a couple of times, as if she was about to say something and then changed her mind at the last moment. Breakfast ended with the usual bustle, packing Sam's backpack, finding a hastily crumpled piece of paper with assignments, braiding Lily's hair into neat pigtails, each one tighter than the last, then dragging the runaway sneaker from under the bed, which for some reason always ended up in the farthest corner. In this whirlwind, Tom felt better. The mundane has mass, and it attracts you like gravity. He hardly thought about the find until it was time to say goodbye. The air on the porch was clear and cool. The neighbors' cars were warming up, and someone's yard smelled of freshly cut grass. Sam had already shot off to the car. Lily hobbled after him, yawning. Caroline paused at the door, hugging Tom. Thank you for breakfast, she said quietly. You're a master of surprises. He inhaled her perfume, light and vanilla-tinged, and for a moment felt everything coming together. Ask now flashed through his mind. But the children were already hurrying, arguing over who would sit by the window. The moment had shifted. Talk later, he said, looking into her eyes. Talk, she tensed up for a split second, and then, as if catching herself, smiled. About what? Just, how are you doing? You look tired. Oh, she laughed, too loudly. Work is on the line. Getting ready for the trial, everyone's on edge. But I'm fine. A nod, a soft, I love you, over his shoulder. He responded in kind, watching the silver sedan as you let go of a paper boat, hoping it wouldn't sink. The road to the office flew by like a blur. At the briefing, he nodded in time with the words of the department manager, catching himself not hearing the meaning. On the monitor, the drawing blurred, the lines ceased to be lines. By lunchtime, his patience had run out. Tom dialed Caroline's number. The beeps came in a long line, like empty train cars. Usually, she answered quickly or called back. Today, it was an answering machine. He hung up. Probably a meeting, he told himself. He waited 10 minutes. He called again. Nothing. His mind whispered explanations, an archive, clients, a phone forgotten in a bag. But somewhere under his ribs, like thick foam, a silent protest was building. It doesn't look like it. By the end of the day, there had been no missed calls from her. Tom found himself feeling a small, frozen anger, mostly at himself, for not being able to just ask. But asking on the phone was awkward. He drove to the law firm's office. A two-story building in the center glass, concrete, neat bushes at the entrance. People scurried past, door locks clicked, brakes squealed. He parked a little to the side, turned on the hazard lights. At 5 o'clock, the doors swung open, and the employees appeared on the steps. And there she was. And next to her was a tall man in a dark blue suit. Richard. The name stung, although a second ago it had just been a name from his wife's stories. They were going down, animatedly arguing about something. Richard waved his hand, as if emphasizing someone's absurdity, and Caroline laughed loudly like a girl. Tom could not remember the last time he had heard that laugh at home. They approached the parking lot. Richard lightly touched her elbow, helping her around a puddle. Nothing special, but his hand lingered for a split second. A short goodbye hug, innocent, friendly, and yet, a note, an echo. Americans and their hugs, he tried to smile, remembering how someone at a barbecue hugged everyone they met, even the neighbor's dog. He knew Richard superficially, a guy in his 30s, ambitious, well-mannered, single. Not a stranger, but not one of them either. If it hadn't been for yesterday's find, Tom might not have paid attention. But now every little thing added weight to one scale, and the other was empty. The horn of a passing car, short and angry, pulled him out of his stupor. He took a deep breath, started the engine. The children needed to be picked up, doing exactly what a father should do, step by step. Sam ran out of the field, grass spattered, happy. The car smelled of cold sweat and peppermint gum. He took Lily from Caroline's mother, who, as always, treated her granddaughter to cookies in reserve, and thrust a container of soup into Tom's hand, so that we don't have to cook for dinner if we're tired. They returned home when the sky had already stuck like lead to the roofs. The hallway was dark, only the light was on in the kitchen. Caroline stood at the table, startled when the key turned in the lock. "Sorry I'm late," she said, stroking the tabletop with a towel in confusion. "Did you call?" "I left my phone in the car." "Nothing," Tom answered, trying to remove all unnecessary words from his voice. The children rushed to her, and she came to life. She hugged them, kissed them, as if she were breathing in their laughter. Then she raised her eyes to Tom. "How is your day?" He caught her gaze open, attentive, but somehow wary, as if she was waiting for him to say something unusual. Tom smiled too evenly. "Normal. And you? You look tired." "It wasn't easy," she admitted, looking down. But Richard was a great help. The name hit the air like a spoon hitting a glass. Tom put Sam's backpack down. "I saw you at the office. He said it casually, like talking about the weather. She froze for a split second, as if the lump of dough in her hands had stopped wrinkling. "Did you stop by?" "I was passing by," he sighed vaguely. "I wanted to wait, but I had to pick up the kids." "I see," she bit her lip. "I hope we didn't look stupid. Richard was telling a funny story well," she tangled up the words as if they were headphones. "I see," he replied without developing the topic. Caroline left for the kitchen almost immediately, citing dinner. Tom watched her go, thinking how quickly she changed direction when the conversation took an undesirable turn. Was it like this before? He asked himself. He wasn't sure. Maybe he'd just noticed less before. Dinner passed without incident. Granny's soup came in handy. Lily chatted about her little plasticine dragon. Sam built a bridge out of a fork and knife and explained why a bridge needed support. The house balanced itself like a boat with all the passengers evenly seated, but there was still some noise somewhere under the stern. Tom lay for a long time that night, staring at the ceiling. In the corner, the router flickered green, steady as a metronome. He caught the rhythm and suddenly realized that his own "everything is fine" sounded exactly like that. Standard, without accents, without what makes speech lively. The thought pricked, but did not cut. Their happiness sends signals weak. They can go unnoticed for now if you are distracted by the news or your smartphone. But if you don't notice for too long, it will be too late. Find out the truth. He formulated it as a protocol. Not emotionally, carefully, gently. Not destroying what should not collapse. He will not allow doubts, possibly unfounded, to gnaw at the house from the inside. And he will not let go of the anxiety if it turns out to be not empty. He turned on his side, listening to Caroline's even breathing. Fear and hope lay down next to each other like two dogs at the door. He didn't chase either one away. Both were needed so as not to miss the right moment and not to break into unnecessary words. At dawn, he already knew what he would do. Look more carefully, speak more precisely, not guess, and, if necessary, become a detective in his own home. Careful, invisible, just enough to understand what was happening and not a step further. In the following days, Tom moved as if on thin ice, slowly, without sharp gestures, listening carefully to where the treacherously crunched under his feet. On the outside, he was the same caring husband and father. He picked him up from training, washed the dishes, picked up Lily in his arms like a helicopter, and joked with Sam about homework. On the inside, he was a restless detective who not only looked, but also heard things he had previously passed by. How a pause lingered in an answer, how a closet door creaked, how breathing changed in a half-sleep. The first thing he did was decide to do something that had seemed impossible just recently. One evening, when the house was quiet, the TV was mumbling something soothing, and Caroline, tired and warmed by a blanket, dozed off on the sofa, her phone left on the coffee table among the remote control, a box of hand lotion, and a child's sticker stuck to the varnished surface. Tom felt a slight click in his chest like a lock that had not been opened for a long time. He carefully took the phone. The edges were warm from her palm. The glass was almost weightless. His thumb on the button, the screen flashed. The familiar rectangle of the request floated out. He typed Lily's date of birth. 4 digits, 2 clicks a movement brought to automatism. Incorrect password. His heart fell into the void, like a pebble into a well. First a quiet click, then a long silence. He entered it again, more carefully, one by one, as if following a thin trail. Incorrect password. He pulled his finger away as if he had been burned. His throat was dry. A ridiculous thought flashed through his mind that he had mixed up the month and day, although the date was like an imprint on the wall. He tried the combination with zeros. Maybe it changed to something obvious. The screen remained dull and alien. He heard his own breathing too loud for this room, and it made him feel uneasy. He squatted down next to the sofa to put the phone exactly where it had been, repeating the angle like someone returning evidence to its place. Caroline was asleep, her head thrown back, her lips parted. A spot glowed in the corner of her mouth from the nightlight. Tom looked at her, and everything was mixed in that look. Familiar tenderness, someone else's anxiety, sudden bitterness from the abrupt realization of a simple fact: the code had been changed. When? Why? Since then, trust had somehow imperceptibly dried up, like a puddle in the sun. You stood with your back to the window and did not see that the spot was getting smaller. He barely slept a wink that night. The bed, always so generously volatile, suddenly became a shapeless raft. You lie there, and every thought pulls you in the wrong direction. Caroline was breathing quietly and evenly next to him, and that breath, his guide in the darkness, now pricked him as if someone had pulled an invisible string over him. The change of code became an unspoken seal, a black mark on white paper. Something is hidden. He felt like a stranger in his own home, not because he had been kicked out, but because he had not been allowed into a place where there had been no doors before. The morning greeted him with a dim light and a heavy head. Caroline glanced at him and asked if everything was okay. She noticed the circles under his eyes. Tom waved him off. "I didn't sleep well." She chuckled vaguely, paused at the mirror, gathering her hair into a bun, and without having had much breakfast, flew out of the house. "I need to be early. The pile-up is almost too heavy to breathe." The door slammed softly, almost apologetically. Today Lily's kindergarten was closed, a cleaning day. The house was filled with children's rustling. Pencils were tapping, sheets of paper were rustling. Lily was singing thinly, like a bird that only needs one ray of light. Tom sat her down at the table with coloring books, put apple juice in a mug with ears next to her, and threw a blanket over the back of a chair. Artists are cold. And he walked around the house, listening to the steps echoing in his head. The phone was a dead end, so other guides were needed. He remembered the pink lid, that strange little circle. Things rarely came into a house alone. If there was a lid, there was a container somewhere. He checked the bedroom, not like a burglar, but like a man trying to remember where he had put something very important. The top drawer of her nightstand: headache pills, a Band-Aid, lip balm, a modest box of stud earrings. In the bottom drawer, old magazines, a charger, napkins, hair ties. In the closet, neatly folded underwear, t-shirts, jeans. The fabric smelled of her mild laundry detergent. The pockets of her robe on the hook, empty. "Dad, what are you doing?" Lily peered into the doorway, clutching a green dragon coloring book to her chest. Tom shuddered so much that he felt a thin thread twitch in his stomach. He smiled immediately, automatically, like in a photograph. "I'm looking for my mother's keys," he said. "I think she forgot them." "Can I help?" the daughter offered seriously, already stepping inside. "Thanks, honey, I can handle this. Go finish drawing the wings, then show them to Dad." He winked. "Deal?" "A deal." Lily disappeared, leaving the smell of markers in the air. Tom stood in the middle of the bedroom, feeling small, almost cold beads of sweat appear on his forehead. He was ashamed, the way an adult feels ashamed when he suddenly becomes small. His hand in someone else's drawer, his gaze on someone else's piece of paper. But he couldn't help but do it, or doubts would fill all the free space inside. There was her purse. Caroline usually never parted with it, as if it were a small black planet with its own gravity. But in the morning, in a hurry, she had pulled only her jacket off the hanger and grabbed her file folder. The bag was left on the shelf in the hallway. Tom approached it on tiptoe, as if it were a living, wary creature. The zipper rustled noticeably, almost loudly. He blinked and pulled the bag so that the opening was narrow. Inside, it smelled of mint gum, lipstick, and just-in-case candies. A wallet, a small container of wet wipes, trimmed receipts folded like an accordion, lipstick with her lips imprinted on it, keys with a tiny firefly on the keychain, a comb, a packet of rubber bands. His fingers, slightly numb, felt something flat and solid, and his heart sank somewhere near his knees. Plastic, round. He pulled the object out. A plastic round container with a blister pack inside. No lid. He froze, like a man who had suddenly stepped out into the open and was faced with a cliff. Around the edge of the container were the familiar teeth of the fasteners, a thin, barely noticeable mark where the lid had snapped shut. Around the circumference were the days of the week. Several pills were missing from the blister. The empty cells stretched in a chain like the little windows on a train by which he could trace the route of the last few days. No traces of dust, no yellowed edges, everything was new, alive. Tom sank down on the hall bench, a sturdy wooden one, the kind that children like to sit on when they put their shoes on. He sat down the way people do when they suddenly remember gravity. His chest felt like a belt. His throat felt tight, like it wasn't his. This is it, he thought. Not a hint, not a phantom, not a maybe. Something real, tangible. He didn't immediately notice that his fingers were shaking. His eyes stung not with tears, but with something bitter and salty, like sea air. He forced himself to breathe deeper, evenly, slowly, counting his breaths. Resentment, fear, anger all mixed up, spilled from one vessel to another, like sand in a child's watch. Why? The word arose. It was too short for the long pain. There was nothing else inside the bag that said, "Look at me." He carefully as possible in this state, put the things back, trying to restore their previous order. He held the container in his hand for another second heavier than it seemed and hid it in his jacket pocket. The thought of better take a picture flashed and disappeared. He wanted at least this to be his object, his proof, his because he did not control anything that was happening now. He went into the bathroom and splashed his face with water as cold as the morning air, and it restored his ability to see lines instead of blurs. In the mirror, a pale, slightly older man looked at him, a man he knew all too well, and yet somehow, for the first time. He smiled at him, cautiously, experimentally, and saw that the smile was alien. Lily sat on the living room floor and drew. The green dragon now had wings, whiskers, and a shiny crown. Tom sat down next to her, ran his hand through her soft hair. Inside, this simple movement cut deeper than anything else. What if this is true? What if our house is a ship that gets water, and we haven't had time to notice the leak? He didn't want the children to ever see those hellish entities that crawl out of the adult words betrayal, lies, secrets. He swallowed this lump and said, "The crown is gorgeous." "He's a fair king," Lily explained seriously. "He doesn't eat anyone." "That's how it should be," he nodded. That afternoon, Lily dozed on the couch, hugging a dragon she had drawn, curled up under her baby blanket. The house was quiet. Tom stood in the hallway, his jacket in his hands, feeling the weight of the container like a stone. He knew that by taking the pills, he was taking a risk. Caroline would discover the loss. But his thoughts were not only moving along the rails of logic, they were ruled by resentment, like smoke rules the wind. He went into the garage. The garage greeted him with familiar smells: oil, metal, wood dust, the slightly sweet aroma of old cardboard boxes. On the shelves were boxes of seasonal items, a backpack, a set of open-end wrenches, and in the corner was a bicycle with a torn-off handlebar cap. He opened the bottom drawer of his metal toolbox, the one with screwdrivers, Allen keys, a tape measure, and a roll of duct tape. He picked up a stack of rags, felt an elastic void, and lowered the container into it. He covered it with a rag and moved it so that nothing could stick out. He closed the drawer and checked to see if it was clicking or knocking. Nope. Quiet. Back in the house, he exhaled for the first time all morning, as if he could finally inhale air from the surface. But the relief was falsely brief. He knew he had taken a step from which there was no easy way out, and yet something in him calmed down, not because of the immediate victory, but because for the first time in days he had something concrete, even if it was hidden in a drawer with screwdrivers. That evening, Caroline arrived later than usual. The door clicked, her keys jingled, her bag landed softly on the shelf. Tom, sitting on a stool by the kitchen island, caught her glance, quick and searching. Automatically, she checked the inside pocket of her bag, then the main pocket twice. Her face moved, as if a cloud had shadowed a sunny wall. She smiled immediately, a tight, practiced smile without warmth. "Hello," she said, a little higher than her usual note. "How's your day?" "Not bad," he replied. "How are you?" "It's fine." She dropped her bag, went into the kitchen, and started opening the cabinets, too quickly, as if she were washing her hands in ice water. One door slammed louder than the others out of surprise. Tom, she called out casually, as if in passing. Have you seen my charger? I can't seem to find it. He looked up. She wasn't looking for a charger. It was the wrong question for her face, like the wrong caption for the right photo. I didn't see it, he said calmly. She nodded too quickly, looked away, and went into the bedroom. Tom could hear the creak of a dresser drawer, her movements impatient, short, sharp. He sat watching the steam from his half-eaten cup of tea, and he could hear his own heart, its pulse changing its route, straying from its usual path. The deception it was now as palpable as the smell of burning. It hung between them, but they both pretended it was just a new note in their evening. He found himself wanting to say it straight out. Where is he? With whom? The words rose in his throat like hot water, and he had to swallow them like two large pills. Too early, he repeated. Too early. If you start shouting on thin ice, it will crack. That night, Tom was awakened by a slight sound. Caroline rose silently and left the bedroom. He waited a few seconds, just long enough for her footsteps to disappear into the hallway, and then rose himself. In the semi-darkness of the hallway, the house breathed more quietly than usual. He stopped at the edge of the light. The nightlight in the kitchen painted a yellow spot on the wall. Caroline stood at the sink and drank water from a bottle, taking large, nervous gulps. Her shoulders rose and fell more often than calm required. Then she put the bottle down, clasped her hands around the edge of the sink, and froze. In the silence, this froze was louder than any words. He saw her silhouette, familiar as his own shadow. He wanted to come up to her, put his hand on her back, say, I'm here. And at the same time, to step away, to leave, not to make it easier for her that which he shouldn't make easier. Two waves met inside, warm and icy. She sobbed, barely, as if asking the silence for permission. The sound was like a crack in glass, tiny but clear. Tom stood there, listening to his own pulse, trying to match her breathing. He didn't know what those tears were about, the fear of being caught, that it had all happened too far away, something that had nothing to do with him. The questions began to multiply like reflections in mirrors, and he realized that if he stayed here another minute, they would suck him into this corridor like into a swamp. He went back into the bedroom, lay down, and turned his face to the wall. A few minutes later, he heard her footsteps, the rustle of the sheets. Caroline lay down on the edge, moving away a little, not demonstratively, but enough for the air between them to gain weight. She was sniffling, like someone who had just cried and was now pretending to sleep. Tom looked into the darkness, where nothing changed, and felt everything change. In the morning, the children went to their grandmother's. Grandmother loved Wednesdays, my day, as she called it. Caroline, putting on her coat, picked up her folder and went out almost running, throwing over her shoulder, I'll call. The door closed behind her easily, as if it weighed nothing. The house was empty, and this empty space turned out to be necessary for Tom. He knew he couldn't drag it out any longer. He had physical proof in his drawer. But there was no clear clue to why, and without it, all the conclusions would be like children's drawings, recognizable but wrong. He remembered her crying in the kitchen last night. Where should these feelings come out, if not in conversation? Caroline had once kept a diary, half ironic, mischievous, teenage, then more adult, with heavy thoughts, sharply written phrases. In marriage, it seemed, she had stopped. There was not enough time, and who needs it, as she said. What if she came back? He started with the obvious. The bedroom. Under the mattress, nothing, just boards with one slat creaking. On the top shelf of the closet, behind a stack of old jeans, a thin notebook in a grid. He pulled it out with bated breath recipes. Someone else's neat letters from magazines, his favorite, chilly, not her handwriting, but neat clippings. He smiled involuntarily. This smile pierced his heart even more painfully. The office is theirs, but bigger than hers, judging by the neatly stacked folders with files. On the table is a laptop, a pencil in a glass, photos of children in homemade frames. In the top drawer is a stapler, stickers, paper clips. In the second are folders with notes, envelopes, and a couple of business card holders. In the third is an unexpected resistance, a leather notebook with an elastic band, discreet, tactile. Tom ran his finger over the warm, leather dry, slightly rough. The smell was barely perceptible, but very definite. Good paper smells special. He pulled out the notebook and sat down at the table. His hands were suddenly dry and cold. He rubbed his palms together to bring the blood back into them. The rubber band came off the cover with an almost inaudible click. The first page was blank. He flipped through it. Further on were lines written in her handwriting, confident, with the characteristic, slightly slanted TS, with rounded OS that he could distinguish from 1,000. At the top were dates. 6 months old, a year old. Damn, he whispered, although there was no reason to swear. He was simply convinced that his guess had been true. She was keeping a diary again. The last dates were fresh a week old, very close. Blood rushed to his ears. He heard it as if from outside, like the sound of the surf in a sink. The notebook lay in front of him like a window, and the glass was already slightly open. He understood that behind this glass were her words, her explanations or lack thereof, her truth, which did not necessarily coincide with his. And he understood that a step through this frame was not a step back. You can't say later, I didn't see. He placed his palm on the page, not on the text, but on the margin. The warm skin of the paper seemed to respond. He sat motionless for another second, looking at the first line of the fresh entry, listening not so much to the house as to himself. Was he ready for what he was about to read? Was he ready to admit that the truth could hurt? Was he ready to accept that sometimes people write in diaries not for someone else, but because of the pain inside? And still, he was about to learn the truth firsthand. From her hand. He inhaled, held his breath, and not yet reading, not yet diving in, he realized that he had already crossed the line. Tom's hands were shaking as he turned the pages of the notebook to the last few pages. The paper rustled dryly and slightly rough, good, thick, absorbing the ink so that the letters looked confident and alive. But the lines floated away as if water had splashed on them again. His eyes did not obey, his temples were pounding. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, lowered his palm to the blank margin of the page, as if asking the paper to wait, and only then brought his index finger to the first line. May 14th. The numbers with thin serifs, her 4 inches that he would recognize out of 1,000. He nodded to himself, almost imperceptibly, yes, this was her hand, her tempo. He began to read, running his finger along the lines so as not to lose his breath. Today I feel alive again. Richard invited me to dinner. I refused at first, but he insisted. I felt like a schoolgirl on her first date. I laughed like I haven't laughed in a long time. Tom never laughs with me like that. The word never struck his memory. Tom instinctively drew back inside. It flashed how they once laughed at a sticky pancake that stubbornly refused to turn over. How he imitated a newscaster, reading aloud to her the ingredients of baby shampoo. How they ran to the car in the rain and stumbled on the threshold at the same time. Never echoed in his chest. But there was no one to argue with. The diary does not answer, it states. The next date is May 16th. After work, Richard gave me a ride to my car. He was so considerate. He asked if I wanted to go to a concert. Is my memory lying to me, or has Tom not asked me out for a couple of years? I said I had family plans. Why does it hurt to see him disappointed? I'm a married woman. What's wrong with me? Tom couldn't help but stare at the edge of the table, a wooden edge with a barely noticeable nick. Concerts. He rarely suggested going out without the kids. He spent his weekends on sections, repairing a shelf, shopping at the supermarket, where they all went together, as if on a small family pilgrimage to discounts. When was the last time he called somewhere where children don't make noise and the tap doesn't drip? My throat felt sore not from resentment, but from recognition. Between the lines of her, "What's wrong with me?" stood his, "What's wrong with us?" May 20th. Something inside him shrank to a point. He read it. I can't believe I'm writing this. Today, something I've been dreading and wanting at the same time happened. I crossed the line. Richard stopped by in the evening just to check the reports, while Tom was at a baseball game with the kids. As soon as the door closed, he kissed me. I couldn't resist. I felt like a desirable, beautiful woman again. We made love right on the living room carpet. I cried afterward, and he kissed my tears and told me he loved me. He loves me. No one has loved me like that in a long time. The ink was smeared here. The words seemed to float, as if they were dissolving in the warmth of his tears. Tom froze, his breathing shallow and brittle. The living room, their carpet. On it, Lily had built houses out of blocks. Sam had placed cars one after another like a train. He saw this picture so clearly, as if someone had turned on another film over the diary lines. Children's palms, a mug of unfinished cocoa, an abandoned shark blanket. And on top of it, words that could not be erased like a stain. He dug his fingers into the edge of the table so as not to tear the paper. May 21st. I didn't sleep all night. Tom asked if everything was okay. I lied. I can't look him in the eye. I'm a traitor. But when I close my eyes, I remember Richard stroking my hair. Can I go on like this? Tom mechanically ran his hand over his head coarse hair, cold palm. He remembered the morning some morning when he asked her how she was feeling, and she waved him off. The memory surfaced with strange clarity. Her, just like that, his, I understand. Between those two short remarks, it turned out, lay a whole sea. May 30th. I decided I had to end it. I love my family. We met in the park. I tried to explain that we had made a mistake. He grabbed my hands. He said that he couldn't live without me, that he would wait. I left without looking back. At home, I hugged Tom so tightly. If only he knew. God, give me strength. The lines are even, but as if they were written on the go, the words are tilted slightly more than usual. Tom read and felt the warmth slowly straightening between his shoulder blades. She tried thighs word flared up, but immediately went out. He was afraid to warm himself near it. It would burn him hot, then it would be even colder. June 5th. It's not over. I'm weak, disgusting, weak. I went to Richard myself. I swear, I just wanted to talk, but we ended up in bed again. I'm in hell and heaven at the same time. Tom, he's a wonderful father, reliable dear. But with Richard, I feel like the woman from my youthful dreams again. How can I give up this part of myself? Why can't I have both lives at once? The words, wonderful father, bent him in half painfully, as if someone had patted you on the shoulder in a friendly way and you had a bruise there. He grabbed the edge of the notebook, felt the stubborn relief of her handwriting under his fingers. Both lives at once, a child's dream in the body of an adult act. Tom wanted to brush it off, but he couldn't. There was no complacency in those lines, only a tossing and turning that tore both him and her apart. June 12th. Tom doesn't suspect anything, it seems. But sometimes I catch his gaze on me. Richard and I continue to meet at every opportunity. Today, he gave me a necklace, a thin chain with a heart. I didn't wear it, I'm afraid Tom will notice. I hid it deep in the closet. What am I doing? I feel sick of myself. But as soon as Richard touches me, I forget about everything. He automatically glanced at the closet, as if the chain might suddenly jingle in response. Deep in the closet, he could almost see where exactly she might have put it, behind the box of Christmas decorations that they didn't open in the summer. For a second, he felt an icy shower. How many other things in the house were silent about what was hidden in them? He immediately pulled himself together. This was not the time to crawl. June 18th. I bought the pills. Tom and I never thought about it before. After his operation, everything was under control. But with Richard, I'm afraid. God forbid I get pregnant. I have a wedding ring on my finger and a pack of birth control pills in my palm. I never thought that my life would be torn in two. At home, I try to be the perfect wife, and in stolen moments, I belong to another man. There it was, a straight bridge to the pink cap, to the container in the toolbox. Tom felt the puzzle crunching somewhere deep inside. It wasn't a crunch of relief, but a crunch of irreversibility. The picture had come together, and taking it apart was more painful than not seeing it at all. June 25th. Today, the worst happened. Tom found the cap of my pills. I got out of it, but I saw doubt in his eyes. My heart was jumping out of my chest. If he finds out, I will lose everything. Richard says that I have to decide who to be with. But how can I choose? I have a family, children, and at the same time my heart is breaking, because without him I can no longer breathe. I am a terrible person. I hate myself. The last words were written heavily, almost pressed into the paper. The pen scratched the fibers, the ink smeared. Tom ran his eyes over them, not his finger, afraid to kill the letters completely. I hate myself looked so helpless that something inside him shuddered. The anger that had already gathered itself into a fist suddenly met at the other end, not mockery, but blood. He slammed the notebook shut, too abruptly, and immediately pressed his palm to the cover, as if apologizing. His heart was pounding so hard it echoed in his teeth. The air thickened, did not pass, got stuck like thick syrup. Tom stood up, the chair creaked, an alien sound in an alien silence. He walked to the window, rested his forehead on the cool glass. Outside, life was shamelessly ordinary. A boy on a bicycle was zigzagging, trying to go around his own shadow. A neighbor was taking out the trash, pressing his shoulder against the door. The sun stood still, spreading out like a bright spot on the hood of someone's car. Inside, everything that held the house together, trust, the familiar, cracked like ice in the spring. You can still see it intact, but it is already dangerous to walk on it. Thoughts hit my head like hammers. Lover, the love of his life. Felt alive again. Both lives at once. I hate myself. Each sentence burned a hole, and through these holes the cold flew in. He saw how an invisible hand was pulling threads out of the fabric of his and Caroline's common life. Morning coffee, children's drawings on the refrigerator, her, don't forget, Sam has cross-country tomorrow. Everything now seemed to be thrown on top of some other, secret scheme that he had not noticed in time. He closed his eyes. He wanted to the point of physical pain to punch the glass, throw the notebook, break a cup in the kitchen. But his hand did not rise. Something inside died, not loudly, without drama. It simply stopped sounding. The silence became so dense that he heard the clicking of a cooling pipe in the wall. How long he stood by the window, a minute, 10, an hour, he didn't know. Time became viscous, it stopped being measured. When he was able to take a long, correct breath, the pain did not disappear, but it stopped tearing itself into screams. It became clearly outlined, like a wound after washing away the blood. You see the depth, you understand where the edges are. He peeled himself away from the glass, returned to the table, put the notebook back where he took it, carefully covered up. He listened to the house. It was silent, but not threateningly, as if it was waiting. Tom ran his hand over his face. His skin was sticky, like after rain. He sat on the edge of the chair, rested his elbows on his knees, and clasped his fingers. This is the end, flashed through his mind. The end of how it was. He did not finish the thought to the formula, not because he was afraid, but because he understood. Each next word entails an action, and he is not there yet. His "I know" was finally replaced by "it seems." The truth ceased to be a guess and became an object like this diary, like a container in a toolbox. He looked up at the photograph on the table, of him and Caroline on the beach, laughing, with a shell in her hair and sand on his nose. It had been taken on a sunny day, windy, and the sea white with foam. Tom picked up the frame carefully, held it in his hands, and put it back in exactly the same place on the same dust mark. He didn't know what he would say tomorrow, in an hour, in a minute. He didn't know what words could describe what remained and what had disappeared. The only thing he could do now was sit and feel a strange, elastic clarity appear inside, despite the pain. He knew. He saw the lines, and ahead was not later, not always, but only one question that could no longer be pushed aside: what to do with this truth. The next few days were a tight thread, smooth on the outside and frayed on the inside. Tom lived as he should. He woke the children on time, packed lunch boxes, drove Sam to training, read the Gruffalo to Lily before bed, washed the plates, cleaned up the crumbs. He said the right words in the right tone, and the house obediently responded with familiar acoustics. But everything he touched seemed to change its temperature slightly, half a degree, barely noticeable. Caroline kept up the same routine, smiling at the children, taking off her shoes at the door, sipping water from her bottle in short sips, leafing through her correspondence at the kitchen island. Only she looked out the window more often, lingering her gaze, as if there, behind the glass, someone was answering her. Inside Tom, the storm was gone. The fire that had burned his lungs after the diary had burned itself out to white ash. What remained was a cold, inexorable clarity. The previous marriage was over. What the next one would be, if any, depended on both of them, but, like before, would not happen. This knowledge left an emptiness in him, not a vacuum, but an emptiness, a place where you couldn't put furniture because the floor had caved in. A couple of times Caroline came closer than necessary, touching his elbow, stopping at the bedroom door, peering into his face. "Are you okay? You seem somehow different." "I'm overloaded at work," he replied, not looking away but not getting any closer. "A couple of deadlines have piled up." She nodded as if she accepted the explanation and walked away, and yet Tom caught her giving him long, searching glances when he thought he wasn't looking. Neither of them started a conversation. At night, they lay on opposite sides, not demonstratively, but like people who temporarily do not know how to place their hands properly. Sometimes Tom heard her turn on her side, the rustling of the sheets, and invariably he remained motionless, unable to move his hand to her shoulder. He did not want to touch a person who, and this was now written in black ink, also belonged to someone else. He went through the options. Forgive, the word repeated itself in his head, but it was worth remembering. On the carpet in the living room, the love of his life, and his chest was squeezed as if a concrete slab had been lowered on him. Separate, also an adult word with a paper taste. How to explain to children that dad is leaving, because in adult stories there are sometimes places where it is better for a child not to be. Tom ran through the scenarios to shout, to blame, to demand, and rejected each one after another. Not because there was no right to shout, but because he did not want to include the children in the sound of this siren. The decision matured without fanfare, like an apple ripening at night when no one was watching. It just became clear at some point that it was ready to fall. He would talk to her, openly, evenly, without witnesses. Let her say what she had written in her notebook. Let her choose her words. His job was to endure. He had taken to thinking through paper. One evening, when the children were building garages out of blocks, he retreated to his office, found an old sheet of paper with a printout of the project on the table, and scribbled 3 short lines on the back with a pen. The facts without interpretations. What does this do to me? Request what next without threats. It was a safety net to keep from falling into the accusations. Not a word about her phone. Not a word about searching. He didn't want to be an investigator, he wanted to be a man who could withstand the truth. Place, time, space. He remembered how they had once remembered dates, a small Italian in an alley, a blanket and wine by the lake, the rain under the awning of a cafe, when they shared umbrellas with strangers and laughed. These places did not disappear on their own, they seemed to have been displaced by everyday life, which no one noticed like a stream until it was carried away. He called his mother-in-law. "Meg, hi. Listen, I need some help. Caroline and I are going to—" He paused for a second, "celebrate my promotion together. Would you mind putting us up for the night?" "A promotion?" Meg perked up. "Tom, finally. I told you you were underrated. Sure, bring them. Let my bandits stay with me. I'll bake a pie. Just tell Lily the new kitten is a bit naughty and she should put her hairpins up higher." "I will," he smiled, feeling his throat tighten. "Thank you, Meg." It was a white lie. The promotion had happened just a month ago, and the 4 of them had celebrated with pizza from a box and a cartoon in the living room. But Meg didn't ask for details, she was happy for them all. "Dinner for 2?" Caroline asked that evening, when he had outlined the plan. "Are you sure? It's unexpected." "We haven't been out in a while," Tom said evenly. "I thought it would be fun." She looked more closely, too closely. "You've been kind of." She searched for the word, "not here lately. I was afraid something had happened at work." "It's all good," he answered softly. "I realized how little attention I paid to you." I want to make amends. Her gaze came alive for a moment, a sharp fragility settling in the corners of her eyes. Thank you, she said, lowering her eyelashes. Thank you struck with a double echo. It could mean thank you for the chance, or thank you for the convenient excuse. Tom did not choose. He decided to do it himself. On the way home from work, he stopped at the little corner grocery store, the one where the Italian owner was always adjusting his white cap and scolding the tomatoes if they were like plastic. Tom chose pasta linguine, fresh, in a paper bag, shrimp and a small basket of mussels, oranges for the salad, fennel, a bunch of arugula, a baguette with a crisp crust. He saw a bottle of Chardonnay on the shelf with a familiar label, the kind they had drunk on their honeymoon, when there was too much sun and not enough shade, and took it, barely looking at the price. At the checkout, he paused by the shelf with candles, long white ones, their wedding ones, tiny tea light ones no good, colored ones no. He took two thin white ones from the shelf, not for beauty, for meaning. At home, he laid out his purchases neatly, like tools, vegetables on the left, pasta on the right, a cutting board in the center. He took candlesticks from the sideboard, heavy, silver, with fine scratches. He wiped them until they shone. He found napkins in the top cabinet, the same cloth ones that, you don't mind getting dirty, and took them out today. He didn't mind. He moved as if to music, and there really was music. Light jazz, that album where the saxophone doesn't cry, but breathes. The frying pan began to speak with oil when he threw in garlic. The mussels responded with a dry crackle when they entered the heat, and immediately opened up, as if they wanted to talk to themselves. The white wine hissed at the bottom of the pan, releasing steam with the smell of citrus and the sea. Tom caught these smells and held them like holding a ball in the palm of your hand so that it doesn't fall. At the same time, he peeled the oranges to zero, removing all the white films the way Caroline likes it, so that the bitterness does not crunch on the teeth. He cut the fennel into the thinnest half rings, as if shaving soft wood. Mixed the orange, fennel, arugula, seasoned with olive oil, a pinch of salt, and crushed pepper. Threw the pasta into boiling water, set the timer. 6 minutes, al dente. In a small saucepan, he brought the cream to a boil for the sauce, to bind the sea and the field, as he mentally called it. His gaze stumbled upon details as if he were seeing the house for the first time. On the refrigerator were children's drawings, a green snake with a crown, a house with a heart instead of a chimney, a stick family. On the windowsill was a succulent that Caroline watered depending on her mood, and which for some reason lived despite all their forgetfulness. On the table were light plates from a special occasion, said he had wanted to use them for a long time and kept putting them off. He put cloth napkins next to them, folded into triangles like in a restaurant, but without the pathos. He stopped at the living room. The carpet. The very thing that was mentioned in the diary without fail. Tom looked at it for a long moment. Vacuum. Change the carpet. Move the table a few centimeters. He took a breath and left it as it was. Today, he would not play the game of rearrangement to deceive reality. The carpet was in its place, and it was also part of their home. An hour before she arrived, he stopped by Meg's, dropped off the kids with their backpacks and a list of what they like at night. Sam started talking about a board game with their grandmother. Lily vied with each other to tell them about the fair dragon. Caroline kissed them on the tops of their heads at Meg's door, lingered her hand on Lily's head longer than usual. Tom noticed and looked away so as not to read between the gestures. He drove back along a familiar route, noting unnecessary details. A woman with a dog by the park, a truck by the bakery, a boy jumping over a curb. Around the corner from the house, he bought a bouquet of wild flowers from a teenager, daisies, cornflowers, a few stalks of cereal not perfectly correct, but alive. He put them in a narrow vase on the table. The wine cooled in a bucket of ice. The candles stood like two white milestones. Music quietly flowed from the speakers. All that was left was to prepare himself. He went up to the bedroom, stood in front of the closet, looking at the shirts. Should he take the one he had proposed in? Too much symbolism. He chose a simple, dark blue one, jeans without scuffs. He shaved, sprayed a little of that cologne she liked on his neck, just one spritz, so that the smell would not compete with the food. He looked at himself in the mirror and did not judge, he simply nodded, ready. In the office, for a second, he took out a sheet of paper with his 3 points. He read it out loud in a whisper. Facts. Mine. Request. He folded the sheet in half and put it in a drawer. The thought flashed through his mind to take the diary out onto the table, put the container with the pills next to it, so that it would become a common scenography. He rejected it. It would be a trial, not a conversation. The diary remained where it lay. The container was in the garage. He turned off the sound on his phone, switched calls to vibrate. He didn't want anyone to interrupt their evening. He put a bottle of water and 2 glasses on the kitchen island. He knew his throat would dry out during the conversation. He opened the window a crack so that the room would have something to breathe when the words became crowded. He stopped at the kitchen door and looked at the table, 2 plates opposite, candles, a bouquet, a salad, a pasta dish, and wine. He remembered 9 years ago the night he said, "Marry me." His hands were shaking then, too, not from fear that he would hear no, but from the knowledge that now everything would be together. Today the shaking was different, from the clarity that together was not what it had been. He squeezed his fingers until they cracked and let go. He took a deep breath. The music caught his breath like a warm wave and retreated. The lock clicked, quietly as always. The door opened and closed. Footsteps were heard, familiar from the pattern of soles. Keys jingled in a ceramic bowl at the entrance. A coat rustled on a hanger. A pause. "Tom," she called from the hallway, slightly confused, like a person who had found herself in another world. "Here," he said. She walked into the kitchen and paused for a moment. Her eyes were like those of someone who had seen a photograph from the past in which she had forgotten she was happy. The candles cast a soft shadow on her face. The shadow wavered as she exhaled. "It's beautiful," she said quietly, for the first time in a long time without that strained note. "And it smells like a vacation." "Pasta with seafood," he said simply, "and a salad. Wine, that's it." She stepped closer, ran her finger along the stem of the glass, as if checking to see if it was real crystal. She looked up. "Thank you," she said. "I didn't expect that." "Sit down," he pushed back his chair. "Give me 5 minutes and everything will be on the plates." He laid out the pasta, carefully, a tong in the center, a little more sauce, 2 mussels on top, for show. He put the salad in and poured the wine. He sat opposite, but not strictly, a little diagonally, so as not to seem like a prosecutor at a long table. Between them stood candles, a bouquet, 2 plates, like 4 quiet boundaries. Caroline picked up her fork, then put it down. She ran her hand over the napkin, as if smoothing the fabric to remove an imaginary wrinkle. "Tom," she said, "this is very—" She searched for the word, "careful." He nodded. He took the glass, clinked it, and took a small sip. The taste was the same as he remembered, slightly oily, with an apple seed somewhere at the end. He opened his mouth and closed it. He inhaled again. The words were queuing up, but he didn't want to say them on an empty stomach and an empty head. He needed to eat the pasta while it was warm. "Let's eat," he said, "and then we'll talk." For a moment, fear flashed in her eyes, short, sharp. She nodded and, as if obeying an old, well-trained master, picked up her fork. They ate in silence, but the silence was not oppressive, but deliberate, like a pause before an important line in a play, where the actors hold the audience. The fork had something to do, and it coped. The pasta disappeared, the salad melted, the wine warmed the palms through the glass. It was getting dark outside. In the kitchen, a soft electric light and 2 candles were burning, making the space feel smaller and more intimate. The music quietly switched to another track, in which the saxophone took a breath a little faster. Tom felt his heart adjust to this unexpected rhythm. He put down his fork, ran his hand over his knee, returning to his body. "Caroline," he said quietly, "I want us to be completely honest with each other today. No yelling, no accusations." He looked into her eyes. and no omissions. She put down her fork. Her eyelashes fluttered. For a second, it seemed she was going to say, "Why? What about?" But she only nodded. The candle to his left flickered. There must have been a draft in the window. Tom put his hand next to his plate as a sign. Here it was, open, empty. He was ready, and the evening at last had begun. They ate in silence, and the silence was not empty but a pause with intent. Forks slid across plates as if they were ice. The sauce on the linguine glistened with a warm, oily streak. The wine in the glasses breathed apple pits. Jazz shimmered somewhere behind them, not intruding, but merely reminding them that time was moving. Tom felt each spoonful of air before a sip a little harder than the last. Opposite him, Caroline held her posture just right, but kept adjusting her napkin, smoothing out a non-existent crease, a gesture that used to mean, "I'm nervous, but I don't want you to notice." "Delicious," she said, her voice a little quieter than usual. "Just like that trip. Remember?" "I remember," he nodded. Two or three more simple exchanges about Sam's project, about Lily's fair drawing, about the teapot's cord catching on the edge again. The words bounced off the surface, leaving no trace. Tom put down his fork. His palm lay on the table next to his plate, open and empty. He looked at Caroline. She met his gaze, not looking away. The yellow glow of the candle put a small spark in them. "Let's talk now," he said evenly, honestly, without shouting, without omissions. She nodded, carefully placing her fork on the edge of her plate, as if she was afraid of disturbing something important with the noise. "Okay," she said. Tom, in order not to fall into accusations, mentally repeated his trinity, facts, mine, request, and began with the first. "I found a lid to a round container in the bathroom last Saturday," he said, in the calm way one calls coordinates on a map. "I asked you, you said, probably old. A couple of days later, I saw you leaving work with Richard. Nothing special, a conversation, a laugh, a goodbye hug." He paused, listening to the evenness of his own voice. "Then I found the container itself, in your bag." He didn't say, "Took it from the bag." He didn't say, "Searched it." He simply laid the fact on the table, not as a stone, but as an object to be examined. Caroline clenched her fingers so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She opened her mouth as if she were about to say something she had prepared, but the word stuck. "Tom," she whispered. "Wait." He stopped me gently and moved on to the second point. "It hurts. Not because of the goodbye hug, and not because of the pills as things, but because there was another life between us and I didn't live in it." He didn't look away. "I don't want to scream. I don't want to be humiliated. I need the truth. From you. Not from guesses, not from silence." The music had switched to a slightly faster beat at the wrong time, and Tom had automatically turned down the volume with the remote. He had put the remote back on the table and watched as Caroline licked her dry lips. She looked as if she were standing on the same thin ice he had been walking on for the last few days. She began, her voice shaking. "It's not an excuse. She paused, taking a breath, then exhaled. "I'm confused. I'm very guilty. You have the right." She trailed off, swallowing the word hate. "I didn't mean to hurt you." He nodded briefly. "Didn't want to" was a phrase from the after set, but it was her language now. "Tell it like it is," he repeated. "How long does it last, and what does it mean to you? And also, what do you want?" Caroline ran her hand over the tablecloth, as if searching for an invisible scene to grasp. The candle flame flickered. She looked at it as if reassuring it. "A couple of months," she said dully. "Since the end of May. It started," she waved her hand, "with nonsense. Dinners, conversations. I felt less like mom and paralegal than like a woman." "That's not an excuse," she repeated, as if afraid he'd think she was making excuses. "Then it all got out of control. I tried to stop it, honestly." Her face became stubborn for a second, like a teenager's. "But I couldn't." Tom listened and felt the familiar wave rising inside him, hot, disgusting, and how his new, cold calm brought this wave to the shore, where it hissed and dissolved. "And you bought the pills," he said, not as a question, but as a statement. She nodded. "I was afraid." The words came out sharp and short. "I—" She licked her lips. "I know how it sounds. I know." He pushed his chair back, not abruptly, but so that the creaking of the wood seemed loud. He stood up. "Wait here," he said. Caroline looked up at him with frightened eyes. "Where are you?" "For the thing," he said without raising his voice. He walked quickly down the hall, down into the garage. The toolbox opened with a familiar, reassuring creak. The container was where he had left it, under a rag, next to the tape measure. Tom picked it up, holding it in his palm for a second, feeling the weight that belied its size. He closed the box and went back up. When he returned to the kitchen, nothing had changed. The candles were burning, the wine was flowing gold in the glasses, the pasta was cooling on the plates. Only Caroline had changed. She was sitting at attention, holding her napkin between two fingers, as if she were about to tear off a tiny piece. Tom placed the container on the table, not between him, but closer to him, like evidence that he didn't wave, but owned. "I took it from your bag," he said, "during the day when you were at work." She gasped so quietly it might have been a whisper. Caroline gulped. "You read—" She couldn't finish the phrase, "my diary," and fell silent, as if realizing how many more layers this question raised. Tom paused. He could have said yes now, shown the notebook, and evenly quoted the lines with which he had cut himself. But he remembered the line he had given himself. Today without court details. Today only what was necessary so as not to lie any further. "I didn't bring this to judge," he said. "I brought this so that there would be no maybes between us. They exist. That's a fact. Everything else, you must name yourself." Her gaze softened for a second, not relief, but rather recognition. He was leaving her the space of naming. She nodded, took a napkin, and dabbed at the corner of her eye. "Yes," Caroline said. "I cheated on you. I did it more than once. She clenched her fingers. "It's my fault. I'm not making excuses." The words, spoken aloud, did not ease the pain. They only made it thicker. Tom felt nausea rising, not physical nausea, but the nausea that comes from concentrating on the truth. With a kitchen movement, he found a bottle of water, poured it into a glass, took 2 sips. "What do you want?" he asked after a pause. "Not from me, but in general. Now." Caroline looked at him as if the answer was both freedom and home. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Every day is different. In the morning, one thing. In the afternoon, another. At night," she shook her head. "I want to stop lying, and I want it not to hurt us so much." She exhaled with a quiet sob. "I want to go back to what was." And then, as if tripping over her own words, she added, "But I know it won't be like that anymore." Tom nodded. He had said it to himself before, and now he heard the same formula from someone else's lips. "Then my request," he moved on to the third point. "To separate for a while. No scenes, no children. You'll live with your mother. We'll say that—" He searched for a neutral explanation. "We need space. Then we'll decide what to do next." She closed her eyes for a couple of seconds, as if trying to imagine this space not in meters, but in silence. She opened them. "Okay," she answered quietly. "If that's what you want," she added, and then corrected herself, "if it's right." "I don't know what's right," Tom said, not playing the no at all. "But I know I can't live as if nothing happened." They sat opposite each other, 2 figures illuminated by a warm light, with candles and a plastic circle with a disproportionately tiny weight between them. The music finished the track, a short silence fell in the room, and a new track began with an almost inaudible breath. "I'm sorry," she said, and the sorry didn't sound like a figure of speech, but like a small, crumpled towel that couldn't stop the water. Forgive me." Tom felt a pity stir in his chest, and with it a weariness as thick as cotton wool. He did not say, "I forgive you." Words were too valuable to be thrown about in a hurry. He nodded briefly, not in agreement, but to those who had heard. "Tomorrow I'll pack your things," he said, "and take you to your mother." She wanted to say myself, but swallowed. "Okay?" He stood up, pushed back his chair, collected the empty plates mechanics save when there are no recipes for the soul. She reached out to help. Her palms trembled over the table and froze, catching his gaze. "No need," he said. She clenched her fingers into fists and dropped her hands to her knees. In the kitchen, water began to make a noise like rain. Tom was washing dishes, not because they couldn't wait, but because it was something he could do well without hurting anyone. He dried his hands on a towel and came back. Caroline was sitting up straight, her eyes fixed on the spot between the candles where the container lay. He took his shirt off the sleeves one turn so they wouldn't get in the way and put out one candle. The flame moved and released a thin stream of smoke with the smell of wax. The second candle continued to burn, and the light from it became warmer, rounder. "Are you going to tell the children?" Caroline asked suddenly, without looking up. "We'll tell them together," he replied, in simple terms, without details. He paused. "And not today." She nodded. "And," she hesitated again, you talked to him?" "No," Tom said, "and I'm not going to. This isn't a conversation that's going to fix anything." She looked him straight in the face for the first time that evening, unprotected. Her eyes flashed with gratitude, strange, almost inappropriate, but real, for the fact that he wasn't going to start a fight on someone else's territory, for the fact that their conversation remained theirs. "Okay," she whispered. He looked at the container again, and his hand reached out to remove it from the table. He picked it up, turned it slowly, and put it in his pocket, not because he wanted to take it, but because he didn't want this object to continue to sit between them like a third party. "Are you staying today?" he asked after a pause. "If I may," she said quietly. "I will go to my mother tomorrow morning. Today, I won't go tonight, not in this condition." He nodded. It was a practical answer. There was no tenderness in it, but there was no cruelty either. He walked to the window, opened it a few more centimeters. Cool air entered the room, and the flame of the second candle swayed slightly. He leaned his palm on the windowsill, feeling the rough paint. The house was still the same house, only the sound in it had changed. "I'll sleep in the guest room," he said without turning around. "I'm next to you." He couldn't find the right neutral formula and left the phrase hanging, understandable without words. "I understand," she replied. "Thank you for dinner," she added suddenly, quietly, almost in a whisper, as if thanking me for bread. He nodded. He returned to the table, extinguished the second candle, and the room sank into a soft semi-darkness in which it was easier to breathe. The music died down. Tom put the towel on the back of the chair, took the glasses from the table, and carried them into the kitchen. He went back for the bottle, corked it, and put it in the refrigerator. All these small, understandable actions that kept him in the present. He paused at the kitchen threshold. Caroline was still sitting there, but her shoulders had slumped. He took a step toward the hallway, stopped, and said without looking. "Okay," she responded. He walked into the guest room, felt his legs turning weak. His reflection flashed in the mirror on the closet, a man with someone else's tiredness in his eyes and some new, sharp posture. He spread a clean sheet, put a pillow, sat on the edge of the bed, and finally allowed himself to close his eyes. Behind the wall, the house creaked a little, like a ship changing course. Dawn was creeping across the curtains like slow milk, and the house responded with a deafening silence. Tom woke up in the living room, just as he had fallen asleep in the chair. His back ached, his mouth was dry, his head was ringing with emptiness. The soot of yesterday's candles was still in the air. On the table were 2 glasses with fingerprints, a napkin crumpled into a small lump, and a thin trace of wax on the white tablecloth. Caroline had left 3 hours ago, quietly, like a person leaving who does not want to wake the house. The door slammed softly, the footsteps disappeared onto the porch. No words, only movement. He stood up and walked around the house. On the dresser was a Christmas photograph. The 4 of them, red noses, laughing loudly. Tom turned the frame face down. Later, he said to himself. In the kitchen, he poured himself some water and took a sip. His throat responded with dampness and sand. The pain was not the kind that tears. It was different, motionless like stone. And with it, a strange lightness from the fact that there was no longer between the lines. The truth was on the shelf. Now it could be taken into account. He went out onto the porch and leaned on the cold railing. The street yawned, picking at the morning air with its occasional cars. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Dawn was breaking, and Tom, for the first time in many days, simply stood and breathed. This simply was precious. He knew that ahead lay conversations with children, a calendar, things, someone's signatures, someone's legal accuracy. But all that would come later. Now there was silence. He had to drink it down to the bottom. When he returned, he sat down at the table and opened the notes on his phone. His fingers typed, plan. Underneath that word, he jotted down short lines, not decisions, but milestones he could latch onto. Tell the kids together, temporary separation, boundaries, schedule with grandma, consultation with the therapist, finances. Point by point, the house ceased to be a backdrop, it became a space for doing. First thing, Caroline. He didn't want to drag out the "we'll talk later." He called. Long beep. Second. She picked it up, and from the short intake of breath she took, he knew she was waiting. Hello. Morning, he said. We need to agree on the children. Yes, she answered immediately, without trying to soften. I'll pick them up from Mom today during the day. Let's talk together in the evening. Here with us. In simple words. Agreed, he nodded, although she couldn't see. No details. And let's agree on a schedule for at least the next 2 weeks. Okay, she said after a short pause. I'll bring a notebook. And one more thing, he added, trying to keep his voice even. Let's discuss boundaries. For us. For the house. For the children. Of course, she said, very quietly. The conversation took less than a minute. It lacked the usual, I love you, and that made it sound more honest. They hung up. Tom sat down in his office, picked up the notebook with yesterday's 3 points. Under request, he added, no guests, no overnight stays, no accidents. Without Richard in the children's zone. If an attempt to reconnect a period of complete no contact. If not, talk about it honestly. During the day, he collected a few of her things. Casual jeans, a couple of dresses, chargers, a makeup bag, work folders. Each item said, we lived, so loudly that he wanted to plug his ears. He carefully folded everything into 2 suitcases, zipped them up, and carried them to the door. In the pocket of her jeans was a light circle of plastic. A container with pills. He took it out, looked at it for a second. Small, ridiculous. Then he went out to the garage and put it back in the drawer, but not in the farthest corner so that he would remember. Objects are not people, they can be controlled. Later, he would take it to the pharmacy for recycling. Today, no need for unnecessary symbols. Before heading to Meg, he typed a short message to his friend Mark, with whom he studied together and occasionally crossed paths at running competitions. Need contact with a good therapist. For individual sessions, preferably without unnecessary conversations. The answer came quickly. Yes, we'll send. Hang in there. 3 words that did not require, how are you? And for that Tom was grateful. Meg's house smelled of cinnamon and vanilla. The pie was ready for the grandchildren. Meg opened it right away, clutching a towel to her chest. Tom. There was a cheerful optimism of the hostess in her voice. They slept like angels. Lily woke up and laughed with the kitten. Sam was already asking for something more serious closer to dinner. How are you? She squinted, and in this squint there was more insight than was convenient. It's fine, he replied. We'll go with Caroline this evening. We need to talk to the kids together. Meg nodded more slowly. Of course, I'll be home. If anything happens, I'll go up to my room. She didn't ask too many questions. Her, of course, was like a soft pillow under his back. He thanked her, unloaded his suitcases, and returned home. By 6 o'clock, the house was warm again. Tom had cleared the table of all unnecessary things, no theater. He laid out a blanket on the sofa, put water and napkins on the low table. The children rushed in like a whirlwind. Sam earlier with the story, Grandma teaches the cat to sit, Lily with a kitten on her tongue and sparkles in her eyes. They swooped down, hugged him, and this blow of love almost knocked Tom off his feet. "We'll talk today," he said when they were all seated. "The four of us. It's important." The words "important" and "four of us" instantly made the air thicker. The children instantly became serious as only children can. Caroline sat down next to him, and Tom felt her knee shaking. He looked at Sam and Lily and said, trying to keep each word simple, "Mom and I love you very much, and we will always love you. We are a family. But it is difficult for Mom and I together now. We decided to live separately for some time. Mom will live with Grandma. You will be with Mom, then with me. We will do everything so that you feel calm and understand. This is not because of you. You are not guilty of anything. Never." Caroline nodded and repeated, "Never. This is an adult matter. We'll sort it out. You are my favorites. The most." Lily squeezed the doll, her eyes filling with water. "Dad, are you leaving forever?" "No," Tom said confidently. "We'll have a schedule. Monday and Tuesday with me. Wednesday and Thursday with Mom. Weekends in turns. We'll schedule everything so we don't get confused. And we'll see each other every day, at least via video call if you want." Sam nodded and licked his lips. "And football, who will take you there? In my day, me. In my mother's, my mother. If it coincides with her work, my grandmother. I'll check everything with the coach." "And Lily's braids?" Lily whispered. "Can you do them?" "I'll teach you," Tom said, and he smiled for the first time that day, sincerely. "I've already got the fishtail down. It's a little crooked, but we'll manage." Lily sniffled and pressed herself against him. Sam looked away, then asked sharply, "And you? Will get divorced?" The silence was palpable. Tom did not shy away. "We don't know," he answered honestly. "Not now. We're taking a break and going to people who help us talk when things are hard. We'll try to figure out what's right. But no matter what happens, we're your parents. That doesn't change." Sam nodded slowly, like an adult. Lily cried quietly for a minute, then wiped her tears with her palm and asked for a cartoon. Tom turned on a kitten named Woof, for them short, kind. The children relaxed a little. Caroline looked at him grateful and broken at the same time. He answered with a look, not for the sake of gratitude. When the children went to their rooms, they sat down at the kitchen table. They didn't get out the wine this time. Caroline's notebook, pen, Tom's phone with the calendar open were placed on the table. "Schedule," Tom said. 2 weeks ahead. Then we check in." They scheduled the days, marked football, kindergarten, meeting of the parents' committee, vaccination. They checked who would take whose shift if the other had a hitch. Everything was calm, routine. This everydayness was the support. "Finances," he said after. "The general account, we split it in half for expenses on the children and the house. Personal, each one his own. I'll take on the mortgage for the next 3 months. You the kindergarten and clubs? Then we'll recalculate." "I agree," she nodded surprisingly quickly. "And I'll make an appointment with a therapist. And with us, the couple too, if you're ready." "I'm ready to talk," he replied. "I can't promise any results, but I'm in the game as long as the rules are fair." "No contact?" she asked without looking up. "If we're trying to restore," Tom said, not moving his gaze, "yes, complete. Otherwise, we say honestly that we're not restoring and move toward divorce in a civilized manner." She nodded. There was fear and relief in that nod. Clarity, even if it cuts, is better than fog. "I'll tell him," she said, almost in a whisper. "Today, that everything. That I have a family, and that I don't need," she paused, searching for the right word, "any more than that." He didn't answer. The words, "thank you," were out of place here. He simply recorded, The decision had been made. Whether life would test it, whether it would endure, was another matter. That night the house slept restlessly, but without hysterics. For the first time in many days, Tom fell asleep not from exhaustion, but from the fatigue of a worker who had honestly worked his shift. In the morning, he woke up before the alarm, pulled on his sneakers, and went outside. The air was humid, the early birds were chattering. He ran in his usual circle, through the park, past the school, along the stream. At first, his body protested, but after the second kilometer, his breathing evened out. His thoughts formed a simple rhythm. Inhale, step, exhale, step. It was simpler than any words. Returning, he brewed black tea and began to repair that same creaky floorboard in the hallway, the third from the left, which they had always been meaning to talk about. He took out the slat, put a spacer under it, smoothed it out, and secured it. The floor was silent. Tom stood there, listening to the silence, and smiled with the corner of his lips. That afternoon, he called the therapist through Mark's contact. The woman's voice on the other end was smooth and warm. "I have windows on Tuesday and Friday. For what purpose are you contacting me? I want to learn not to live inside other people's words," he answered unexpectedly for himself. "And inside my own, too." "I'll see you on Tuesday," she said. "Come." He wrote it down and closed the notes. In the evening, when the children came, the house seemed a little louder again. Shouts from the hallway, requests for, "Dad, where are my green shorts?" Lily's, "Can I have 2 episodes?" They had macaroni and cheese for dinner, and Tom found himself laughing for the first time in hours, not loudly, but sincerely, when Lily showed him the fishtail on his own head, braided with her clumsy fingers. Caroline came to pick up her things. Meg was waiting for her in the car and hugged her briefly. On the threshold, she and Tom exchanged a few phrases. There was salt of a sleepless night in her eyes. "I said," she said, and Tom understood without further ado. He, she shrugged, didn't accept it. "But that's not my part of the conversation with you anymore." "Okay," he said. "Tuesday, therapist at 7, she added, as the bus schedule reports. "Steam room on Thursday, 8, office on Broadway." "I'll note that," he nodded. She took the suitcases. She froze for a second, looking behind him, where the upside-down photograph was still lying on the dresser. She slowly turned it back over and set it down straight. "Let him look," she said quietly. "This is about us too, not just about pain." He didn't answer, but he didn't turn back. The weeks formed the first outlines of a new life. On Mondays and Tuesdays, he woke the children, made porridge, braided their hair, took them to school and kindergarten, and rushed to football after work. On Wednesdays and Thursdays, the house was quieter. He stayed late at the office, caught up, came back and read alone, and then called the children via video link. Lily would certainly show a toy, Sam a new goal. They divided the weekends, swapping, sometimes swapping by agreement. Grandma's having a party, the coach is on a trip. He and Meg had established a secret channel. If someone needed help, a quick sauce in a messenger and a teapot emoji. Meg showed up with a pie and a willingness to sit in the kitchen in silence. Mark texted, "Running on Saturday," a couple of times, and Tom agreed. They ran side by side and barely spoke. That helped, too. The therapist listened. Tom spoke, for the first time in a long time, to himself, without "have to" or "should," about how easy it had been to be reliable for many years, and how invisibility had hid unnoticed behind that word, about how he didn't want to be the best father solely out of guilt, about how he didn't know if he could trust again. He wasn't looking for quick answers. He was learning to say "I" without excuses. In Caroline's couple sessions, there was a lot of "why" and "how did we get here?" There was a lot of silence and a few important sentences. "I stopped talking when I was tired. I started fixing the floors instead of asking what hurt. We both chose what was comfortable until it cracked." They negotiated a language, not "you always," but "I feel," not "you should," but "I need." It was artificial in places, but so is learning to walk after a fracture, and yet they walk. The letters from the lawyer were in draft form. Tom had met for one consultation just to understand the words division of property, guardianship plan. He was not eager to formalize. He wanted to know where the banks were if he took them away. Caroline, with her professional insight, did not interfere. Tell me, if necessary, I will find contacts. He said, not yet. One evening, when the children were already asleep, he went out into the hallway and deliberately walked along the third one from the left. The board was silent. He smiled not just with the corner of his lips, but for real. On the dresser, the photograph looked honest. A Christmas tree, laughter, four faces. He stopped, picked up the frame, brought it closer. It was both theirs and not theirs. He put it back, let it stand. He took the container of pills to the corner drugstore, the one where the pharmacist always greets you by name. There was a sign there saying, medication disposal. Tom put the plastic in a clear box. Nothing symbolic happened, just another object finding its right place, and that made it a little easier. The new life was neither bright nor dark. It was work, made of deeds, of words, of pauses, of a calendar on the refrigerator where multicolored markers marked mom, dad, football, garden, therapist. There was more silence in it, not the kind that deafens, but the kind in which you can hear, I am. Sometimes at night, the pain would come back with a sharp blow, a vision of the carpet in the living room, a phrase from the diary, the shadow of someone else's hand on her back. Tom would get up, go to the kitchen, pour water, and listen to the house. The house was breathing. He was breathing with it, and he would wait for the morning not as salvation, but as the next line in the plan. One day, watching the sunrise, he went out onto the porch again. The railings were warm from the July air. The school was already noisy outside. Someone was dragging a school bag. Someone was shouting, "Bye." Tom looked up. The sky was ordinary, no signs, no promises. And that was enough to take a step down the stairs and go tie Lily's shoelaces. New life rarely begins with fanfare. More often with the fact that you show up on time for your son's practice, remember to put fennel in your salad, and know how to say it hurts without screaming. And in this, there is room for hope. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.